Hey everyone, it's Aminata Desert Rose Plant Walker Firewoman, and I'm here today with a very special guest, Osprey Lake. She's the author of The Story Is in Our Bones and the founder of Women's Earth and Climate Action Network. So welcome, Osprey.
Thank you so much. Good to be here with you today.
It's good to have you. It really is. I've enjoyed your book. I was sent it a few months ago, and I really love how you integrate your story into it, or your stories into it, and the stories of the women and folks who you have worked with or who you have observed, working for the earth and um, her protection. So I just want to say straight up, I loved your book. I think it's an amazing book. And in the Mother Tree community, we're actually reading it as a community. And
Oh,
we'll be discussing it in April.
well, I tell you, just made my heart glow. Thank you so much for those generous words, and I'm really thrilled and very honored that your group is reading it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I want to start. We start off every interview by asking the person, what is good? So, what is good to you today on any level that you want to address that?
Ah, wow. Well, what is good today is, we've just here in the Northern Hemisphere are celebrating the spring equinox right now. And I was up this morning and looking at some trees outside of our house that are now blossoming, and just the beauty of the petals and the aroma and the birds singing. And it was just beautiful to see that, because there's a lot of difficulty in our world right now, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of violence. And just to tune back into nature and Mother Earth and see that ever beauty making that is going on every day. And that's what I'm living for and fighting for, and wanting communities all over the world to be able to be centered in earth connected communities and families and homes and countries, where this is the focus, our relationship with each other and the land. And it was just good to have that breather in the midst of so much turmoil.
Mm, yeah, yeah, me too. It is such a counterpoint to the suffering that's happening right now. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you talk about this in your book, was about, in some ways, you talk about multiple timelines, you know, and you talk about how there's one world that is coming apart, and there's another world being pulled forward, being brought forward. Tell me about, like, how do you hold both of those things? Or where do you put your focus? If both of those things are true, where do you put your focus?
Oh, that's such a marvelous question, really. I think it's uh, an ongoing process. It's like a living question you ask me, because it's something I ask myself literally every day. So you put your finger on something that's really deep in my thoughts and heart right now, is, how to really welcome this world that many of us are pulling forth from the deepest part of our bones, if you will, the deepest part of our spirit and soul, really seeing this world of equity and a healthy nature, and changing our economy, and living in reciprocity with each other and the land, and there being real reparations for frontline communities, and respect for, indigenous peoples and Black and brown communities, and all these things that we are really knowing are part of our human experience and could be more of how we're actually living. And localizing our economies, localizing our food systems, caring for neighbor, all of these things are near and dear to us. And so part of the work we do at We Can, and how I live in my own personal life, is birthing this world we know is possible, that many people are already living at a very local level. And how do we nurture that and create projects and programs and community to bring that forward, and our creativity and the artists and all of it that comes with that way of living we want to be in, and dip in and out of, hopefully, in our daily lives. And then, as you mentioned, there's this other world that is, we can't ignore. I don't want to ignore. We need to intervene into that space. And so also in my writing, but also in my work at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, it's a constant intervention. As many great thinkers and leaders have said, this kind of oppressive power system that we live in is not going to just sort of roll over because we're making demands or calls to actions. We have to intervene, whether that's through voting, whether that is for, we do a lot of different delegations, bringing frontline women's voices to go meet with financial institutions, to go meet with governments, and to really express the changes we want, whether that's through, having protests, having meetings, writing reports, doing campaigning. There's all kinds of ways to stop bad projects from happening, whether it's fossil fuel extraction or deforestation in the Amazon. It takes many forms, but how do we actually intervene in these systems so that we can connect with human beings who want to make the change, but also need a different view? And how can we have interventions that bring healing and equity to a system that's really failing most of us? And it's not even, obviously. And so, that's how I sort of look at it, like, as someone who has white privilege, what is my role to intervene in the system, just to name it, of patriarchy, racism, colonization, and capitalism? To me, these four systems, and I would add, right now, militarism, imperialism, that come with those systems. And how do we dismantle them? How do we take them apart? How do we transform them? And so, to sort of, the last thing I'll say about this great question you've asked is, like, this is the world I see I want to live in, and is filled with beauty. And here's a world that we have, not to create just binaries, but, we're in these very difficult systems that are harming us. And what is the space in between? And how do we sort of bridge in here through education and campaigning and many different modalities, where we begin to transform the current system into one that we want? And so this is what I'm really getting into in the book and in our work, because I also feel if we don't engage the powers that be, they will just continue. The elite will continue. That elitism and that supremacy will continue, and we need to intervene into that space and offer our agenda and our ideas and our creativity and our love in all the ways that we can in this time of really trying to balance what's happening in our communities and with the land.
Yeah, I noticed that you do toggle in the book in terms of the intervention and the stepping back, the intervention and the kind of processing and being grateful. It's like it's a really interesting dance that you're doing, um, and you talk about it as being I don't know if you use the word multi. I mean, you talk about multiple timelines, I think, um, but there's something about it where it's not linear, and it seems to be like well, I guess it gets down to worldview. Like, how do you create a different worldview than the one that we have been surrounded by and disciplined into, you know? So, which I think it's the title of your book, The Stories in Our Bones. So tell us about, like, how do you see cultivating that different worldview?
Yeah, so that, as you were mentioning, the book is The Stories in Our Bones, as you said, and then the subtitle is How Worldviews and Climate Justice Can Remake a World in Crisis.
Mm.
And so that's really the subtitle really lends itself to your question, in the sense of, at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, on a daily basis, we're dealing with very immediate situations. As an example, right now, in Wisconsin and in Michigan, there's an Enbridge fossil fuel pipeline that, I won't go into all the details, but we're really fighting to stop that, because it will harm Indigenous and Black communities, particularly in their water, and the possible leakage from this new pipeline. There's already pipeline in the ground that is overdue. And so, it's a rather urgent situation, and also because it will contribute to the climate crisis with more fossil fuel production. And so we're engaged, getting out there, campaigning, going to Washington, D.C. to talk to lawmakers about stopping this pipeline. So it's just like one example. And we're working in the Amazon to stop deforestation, and we're reforesting in areas and bringing back forest in the DR Congo, in the Otombe region. So there's all these very daily activities of things that we can actually do to transform the current system, stop harms, build beauty. And at the same time, we need to, from my corner of the world, step back as we're also doing that. So there's these short-term, immediate fires that need to be put out, in other words, or places where we could really create a beautiful change with food sovereignty or food security in a region. At the same time, I kind of see that if we were to be able to pick up a magic wand and end the climate crisis, let's say tomorrow, it actually would be wonderful, yes, but it wouldn't really necessarily stop our way of thinking that got us into the crisis. It wouldn't stop environmental racism. It wouldn't stop colonization. It wouldn't stop what is happening in Gaza. It wouldn't stop environmental degradation, because we're continuing to have a culture of over-consumerism. We continue to have white supremacy. We still have these structures of economy, under capitalism, in which it's an extractive economy, in which we're going to continue to take more and more from the earth than fit within the planetary boundaries. And so none of that would stop. And so, yes, we're, every day working to help communities in any way we can, but at the same time, we need to go upstream and look at our worldviews. How did we get into this crisis? What is our thinking? How do we transform these systems that caused these harms? And how do we come back to being in an earth lineage and being in a place of egalitarian societies, as some of our ancestors, many did in the past? And how do we actually get rooted again in equity and justice and love and care and reciprocity with the land? And that's an upstream question, because that involves our worldviews and how we see ourselves in relationship to the land. And I'll just give one example of, when we look at what's happened in modernity, there's this idea that we're no longer part of nature. We're above nature, humans above nature. And so how do we regenerate these ancient knowledge systems that we all had, wherever our ancestors are from originally, that we are living in an animate cosmology. We're living in a world of relatives. The trees are our relatives. The water is our relatives. All humans are equal and are our relatives. The mountain is alive. The wind is alive. And how do we bring back the fact that we're in this living universe? Because when we see the earth as alive and our relative, we will treat the earth differently. And so it's also a worldview question of how do we come back to balance in egalitarian societies, and how do we also regenerate the sense of an animate world that we are part and particle of?
Yeah. When you just said that, two questions I want to ask you. I want to ask you about Earth lineage, so let's put a little pin in that. But the other piece about what you said in terms of worldview is the Earth as living, and everyone around us is a sibling, but also as maybe an authority,
Mm.
having a perspective that we need. Um, what do you think about that? Like consulting the land, the earth, the trees, on what do you want? What would you have us do next?
Yeah, that's a beautiful framing, and I really resonate with that. Absolutely. Um, again, sort of taking into account that the earth is alive and the trees and the rivers and the mountains are alive. They're also our teachers, is how I would look at it. And I know, when I wrote this book, the first place I went to see the idea is in the ancient redwood trees that are here on the California coast. They're very, very old, thousands of years old. And I think that when we sit with nature, we have different thoughts and experiences if we tune in and listen. And whether it's the ocean or the river or the trees, or if we have a garden, and also, thinking about people in urban environments, even if there's a tree right outside your door, or you can look up at the sky and look up at the stars at night, whatever access we have. Sometimes even if we're in a confined situation, closing our eyes and imagining the earth under our feet and the deep, deep, deep roots of our connection to the land wherever we are. And listening, as you were saying, listening to the earth. I do think there's so much knowledge just from observing and being in nature and watching how nature is reciprocal in all of her magnificent activities and diversity. And we have so much to learn from nature. And another component of it on a very practical level is a whole field of science called biomimicry, which you might have heard of, which is to really, look to nature for solutions, because nature is always producing activities that are healthy and are thriving for life and bring the thriving of nature. And so how do we also look to nature for solutions? I think is also a component of this, because nature is very sophisticated. And every time we step out of the natural laws of the earth, or don't do things that create life enhancing conditions, we continue to harm our communities and harm the earth. And so I think going to the earth and listening is so essential, both at a spiritual, emotional, and mental level in terms of guidance, but also at a very practical level about how to invent things, how to do things that are conducive to a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, um, just look at my own evolution, in terms of how my activism has evolved over time. I remember talking with somebody in the early 90s. This is like back when I was in grad school. And um, this is a group of young Black people, and we were talking about something. And Alice Walker had just come out with a collection of essays, I think. And one of her refrains, or maybe it was a poem, one of her refrains was hug a tree. When they do this to you, hug a tree. And I remember this one young student who was there, I was like, yeah, I really love that. He was like, come on, Amanda, hug a tree. And I laughed, because at that time, the way we understood the world, that does nothing. That's just, you opting out. But there's a whole shift going on right now, right? And how we look at who makes change, who is wise, who has consciousness. And so that advice to hug a tree has really come back to me. And
Mm.
I wonder, how do you recommend that people start to have a relationship and be able to cultivate the ability to listen?
Lila June Johnson is a really wonderful teacher around this. She's a Navajo, beautiful, powerful woman who's also an artist who teaches about how, we were at one time a keystone species, indigenous peoples here in Turtle Island, the United States of America, and worked with the land. And even though when white settlers came here, it looked like wilderness, it wasn't. It was land that had been tended very carefully to ensure, balance in ecosystems. And I think this is something that we need to really talk about and figure out once again, how do we get our modern societies to move from being a detriment to the land into a different framing and worldview of how do we actually enhance nature and be a part of nature in a healthy way.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I'm thinking about you because you're talking about changing worldviews. And so, and the first step is to move the body towards something, move the body and the attention, out of the spaces where we get colonized. Honestly, if you look at where these screens, whatever size they are, the constant piping in of information, um, and and there's something different about the pace of
Mm.
nature. It's almost like it's not, the language is more symbolic. It's different. It just takes a different tuning. Mm.
Yeah, I love what you said about pacing. it's really, I think, such a big component. And, as we talked about earlier, in my book, I'm also addressing this concept of time and pacing, and how we actually are, from my understanding, um, in a real interesting time puzzle, you might say, a time riddle,
Hmm.
because on the one hand, I see that we really need to slow down and listen to nature and have time for our friends and family, and to do things in a really deep and well and uh, thoughtful way. And at the same time, we live in a society under capitalism and colonization that is so extractive of our time, our attention, our spirit, our emotions, our thinking, and just constantly pushing us forward just to pay rent, care for our families, and get food and take care of our health. Those basic things are under enormous pressure every day. And so we're not really living at the pace of well-being, most of us. Um, and this really takes away from our health and also our ability to tune into listening to nature while you're scrambling around trying to get to your next appointment or meeting or meet your bills or whatever is going on. And so, we have rare moments where we get to actually maybe get quiet to see what is our natural rhythm and pace, to be in a different worldview, a different mindset, and a different relationship with ourselves. And so I do think that pace is a really big thing, and how, at the same time, we need to slow down and maybe garden, or do things that bring us into a place with the land and also help us care for our families. We also know that, the climate crisis and environmental degradation are piling down on us. And so I know at the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network every day, I get emergency calls at least 2 or 3 times a week, around some crisis, whether it's a fossil fuel pipeline that has exploded, or some company coming into one of the communities that we work with a new, deforestation project, or it goes on and on. Um, and this requires a certain kind of campaign, fired up energy, which I don't think is bad. This is how to respond to a crisis and urgency, but it's there's different timelines. And this is why I was sharing that at the beginning of the book, that what I'm learning, everyone has different ways of entering this. For me, I've sort of entered into this realm of a multifaceted timeline, where I have to allow myself to be in non-linearity, in a non-linear framework. In other words, I need a way to be, with nature, be with my family, friends, and close to nature, and be in a slower pace, while simultaneously I'm fired up and racing forward on a campaign that's urgent. And how do I sit with both those things at the same time? And that is literally my daily life. I'm doing both
Yes.
at the same time, attempting to. And it's just what is. And from a sort of a Western logical view, it doesn't make sense. But when I let go and I accept it, it seems to work to some degree. And it seems to me unavoidable. In other words, I must have some quiet, or I cannot function and support the work that we do. But I'm also aware there's a lot of late nights, early mornings, and extreme situations to be in. Some of the women we work with are land defenders whose lives are being threatened for their land defense. Like, that's not going to go on hold. And these are my friends and family and colleagues. And yes, I'm going to respond quickly. So, I've tried to just relax into that both are going to happen at the same time.
Mm, mm. Wow. Mm. I'm just taking that in because it is so real. It is so real. Um, I wonder how you feel about subtle activism or energy activism. One of the things that I've noticed, and this could be, do you know what I mean by that?
I'd love to hear your definition. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. When I think of those terms, I'm thinking of people who are doing work in other realms. So there is the 3D realm of, the meetings with lawmakers and the elections and the on the ground land defense, and then the support of the people on the ground and land defense, like getting resources to them. So that's one form of action for change. Another form of action for change is to work at it on an energetic level. You call it worldview, and I think it is partly mindset. It is worldview in that sense, but it's also uh, it's immaterial, non-material, energetic. You could call it spiritual, where you are, or you can call it prayer. People do different forms of what I would call energy activism. And so I wonder, it could be holding a vision, as opposed to like holding the vision of what this right relationship with the earth could be in your community, outside your house, or however big you want to make it. Does that explain what I'm talking about?
Absolutely. Yes.
So I wonder how you feel about that kind of activism, and I wonder if you ever do any of that.
Mm. Yes, I do. I just hadn't heard that specific term, so thank you. I've never heard the term energy activism. I've heard of spiritual activism, but I hadn't heard specifically of energy activism. So thank you so much for that beautiful definition. Um, yeah, I absolutely think that's key. Um, and I also like your description explanation because it could be different for different communities of people and how they might tune in spiritually. It might be meditation, it might be prayer, um, it might be visualizing things. So each to their own for sure. But I do think it's really important in the ecosystem, if you will, of activism. And I think that's sort of the model that I operate from, is that when we do work to bring healing to the earth or activism, it's an ecosystem. And so, however, each of us feels that we are best aligned or attracted to or makes sense to us is where to plug in. Um, I just believe that we're at such a critical tipping point for humanity and our living ecosystems that wherever people feel that they're passionate about or makes sense to them, the main thing is roll up your sleeves and get in, to get engaged, not step back on the sidelines. One, because we're all needed right now. And two, the earth needs us. And three, it also helps with our anxiety and helps with our concerns, because when you act, you also generate hope for yourself. You're actually participating in this great moment of transition in the human uh, adventure, if you will. We are in this big enterprise together as the human species at a critical cusp point, at a critical moment. And so everyone needs to get engaged as far as I'm concerned. No one needs to be on the sidelines, but we don't all need to do the same thing. We should do it in the way that we're called to do, that we're called to do. And that could be prayer or meditation or, I know some of the women we work with do a lot of spiritual work around the water and protection of waters and forests. So I think there's a myriad of ways in the ecosystem that is collectively part of the new trajectory, the movement we're trying to get into to change where we are to where we actually need to be going. The only other thing I will say on that one piece is that that's my bottom line on it, but I want to put a little flag, which is I do think it's also important to be critical, because there is also what some people have termed spiritual bypassing, or bypassing in different ways. So I think I would just put one caveat, which is, and um, it's not a place to escape. I wouldn't want the energy work or spiritual activism to not have a critical look at, not of sort of saying, okay, everyone else will be responsible, take care of it. I'm very enlightened, and so I'm not going to participate.
Mm.
And so I just think it's important to be balanced when we look at these things. It's also true of sort of the more manifest activism that you talked about. I mean, there can be all kinds of problems in being very, very active on the ground with no time for reflection or meditation or assessment of one's assumptions and worldviews. So you can get out there and just start doing action. Well, maybe your action's not helping.
So, Osprey, one of the reasons, one of the levels that I want to get to is how has your work, working on the front lines or supporting people on the front lines, stepping back, cultivating relationships, slowing down, speeding up, like being living in both of those spaces. What I guess I want to know is who or what do you feel is supporting you? Are there ancestors that you work with? Are there nature spirits? Who or what is bodies of water?
So for me, it's very, very important to have places on the land that I can go and get renewal and listen to the advice of nature, as we've been talking about. So for me, that place is the redwood trees I was mentioning earlier. I often go to the redwood trees. I try to go hiking as often as possible on the land. I'm also here on the California coast, so this is an ocean place. And so going to the ocean is hugely renewing and also informative. So I would say between the redwood trees and the ocean, and then we have a couple of times a year the whale migrations here, which I really love to see, the gray whales migrating. These are all very important to me. And also the night sky. Um, it's very important to me at the end of a big, long work day when it's not raining to go outside and to look at the night sky. And I find that seeing the stars uh, is very, we're talking about worldview and paradigm shifts and different mindsets. Somehow for me, along, of course, with the ocean and the redwoods, seeing the stars is also really profound because it kind of gives that perspective of reminding me and all of us that we're on this planet in space. And it's something we don't talk about on a daily basis because of all the things we were talking about in modernity and just our daily lives and the pace that we live. But, if I stop and just take a minute and realize where we are, I just find it very startling. It's such a contrast to looking at our computer screens and everything else. And yet it is so profound that we're on this living planet in space, the magnificence of it, the miracle of it. It's just so astonishing. And to bring that perspective in on a frequent basis has really transformed how I do everything, to keep remembering the fact that we're, in this gift of life, really, and how it's hard to even put our minds around how profound it is that there are even human beings at all that have evolved. And what are we doing with this precious gift and this wonder and this awe? What are we doing with this? And what is my responsibility? And this is something that is very deep and something that I come back to again and again. And then in terms of humans, I'm very fortunate over many years to have incredible mentors, particularly Indigenous leaders and Black women that I have learned from. Um, I think those have been my main teachers, and I have learned so much from women's leadership, frontline women's leadership, and also Indigenous women who are very connected to the land and have taught me so much. So I owe everything to the mentors that are both human and non-human.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with Barb Horn, who was also on the show, who's a student of the night sky. And it was just in that conversation I realized, wow, we are in space right now. We are in space. So, yeah. And you do talk about that in your book. I love that you begin your book by looking up at the night sky and pointing out the constellations and how in Orion there's stars that are really, really far away, like thousands of light years, and there are some that just a few hundred light years. And so those we're in two different time lines by just being able to absorb those stars.
Exactly. I just because the book is very vast in its scope, with many stories and many different experiences of how we can change a worldview, that when I started by saying, how can I create enough space on the page and in the reader's mind to open ourselves to this discussion? And that's exactly, what came to me is, looking at the night sky, these constellations. And as you said, by the time the light of those different stars come to me here on Earth, they're completely in a different timeline because of how light travels, how many light years it takes to actually touch the Earth with that light. And so that really moved me into understanding, well, I'm standing here, but I'm seeing various timelines, but I'm having that experience. So we can understand more about living in this multifaceted timeline because it's happening to us every day. And we look at the night sky, we actually can experience that. And I find that very intriguing and also helping us to expand what we think is reality, what we think is as time.
Wow, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Um, and we have access to the stars. I know a lot of us live, as you said, in urban centers, and there's a lot of light pollution, and we can still get access. There's still some access. So, Osprey, we're going to need to wrap up, but I want to ask you one more question. And that question is, if there's anything that you want people who are rooted in justice and love to think about or to do differently after hearing this interview, what would that be?
Oh gosh, I have so much love and excitement and yeah, respect for people who are working in the realm of justice and love. To me, we are kin. We are together. We're working collectively together. And I just look to all of us as um, mutually working together on a collective vision for a different world. And the one thing I would say is, I hope everyone who's working in this space has friendship, has community, has love and well-being, because it's challenging work. It's such beautiful work.
Mm, beautiful. And if people want to stay in touch with you or they want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Well, for the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, our website is www.wecan, WECAN, and then the word international spelt out, wecaninternational.org. And then for my book, I have a website under my name, www.ospreyorellake.earth.
Beautiful. Thank you, Osprey Lake, the author of The Story is in Our Bones. The Story is in Our Bones. I love that. Love that allusion to our ancestors, deep knowledge, all of that. So I highly recommend it, and we will see you on the next time.